How basketball tournaments came to be a past standard. Brad Huebner loves to write historical books about high school basketball. In 2023, he wrote Titles for Our Town: How Tiny Pennsylvania Communities Produced Basketball Dynasties and Shaped Basketball History During the Golden Age. And one book leads to another. Huebner's new book is called Johnstown Basketball: The Cambria County War Memorial Invitational Tournament. It's a nostalgic look at one of the first premier holiday tournaments in the state and a forerunner to the dozens of December events across the state now. When I was researching Wampum, I saw that they played in Johnstown in a tournament in 1958 with Dick Allen, and they played Overbrook, who had Wali Jones, who went to play for the 76ers. And I thought, holy cow, this is amazing. And I researched it a little more and saw all the great players who played in Johnstown, Huebner said. Growing up in Allentown, I thought, how could I have not known about this tournament? Gene Banks played in it, Rasheed Wallace and Muggsy Bogues as well. You had the great Dunbar teams from Baltimore, and DeMatha and Morgan Wooten from Washington, D.C. I just thought it was so amazing that Johnstown lured all of those teams up there every December from 1949 to 1994. It was a mini miracle that they did for their townspeople. It was every December, and it was just 4 teams playing with a semifinal round and a championship. The tournament was held at the Cambria County War Memorial Arena in Johnstown, which was the arena where many scenes from the ice hockey classic Slap Shot was shot in the 1970s. There was usually a local team in it, whether it was Johnstown, Johnstown Catholic, or Bishop McCourt, Huebner said. The premise was formed by a local guy who had gone to Duke and wanted to see how Johnstown would stack up against big basketball powers, because Johnstown was really good in the 1950s and won the tournament twice. Continue reading. Huebner, who has been an assistant coach at several schools, including Southern Lehigh, and is now helping out at Schuylkill Valley, said he spent over a year on the book and talked to many of the great players who played in Johnstown. Gene Banks, who was one of the first great players at Duke, wrote the foreword. I talked to Tom McMillan, who had the state scoring record for many years, and he played in Johnstown, Huebner said. Adge Nastasi broke McMillan's scoring record, and his father Joe played in the tournament, and his team won a state championship at Northern Cambria in 1965. Their only loss in 1965 was in the Johnstown tournament to DeMatha. DeMatha had 2 6'8" guys who went on to Notre Dame. Northern Cambria got hammered in that game, but went on to win a state championship, and then Joe's son sets the state scoring record in the 1990s. Many holiday events, including ones that Whitehall played in at Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, and Myrtle Beach, have been well-sponsored events that attracted teams from throughout the nation and were held over several days. The Johnstown tournament stayed small, but even though the field was limited, the level of talent was off the charts. They would scout the teams a year ahead of time and see who was coming back the following year, and they would extend their invitations based on that, Huebner said. One year they had Billy Thompson and Camden in the tournament when Thompson was rated the #1 player in the country. They called the tournament Pennsylvania's first and the nation's finest. A lot of the book is how they built the tournament into such a big deal, and then at the end of the book I get into the things that happened that brought about its end. And one of the things was that the major tournaments that popped up all over the country, South Carolina, Hawaii, Las Vegas, they were bigger and financed better. When it comes to local teams and players, Catasauqua legend Larry Miller played in it twice and was the MVP twice. There was just 4 two-time MVPs, and Larry was one of them, Huebner said. He scored 40 points against DeMatha one year, but they jumped out on Catty 16-0 in that game. Diderot also played it one year with Ross Moore and Jan Kapkala. I was in Hershey last year for the state championship games and I bumped into Bucky Paraschak, who played for Dick Schmidt at Dieruff. And he was telling me about Johnstown, Huebner said. Dieruff played Latrobe in the first round. Latrobe played an up-and-down style and beat Dieruff 93-83. I have a chart with all the scores from each year. Just to get invited into this thing, you had to be really good. Farrell was one of the great programs in state history, and they started out in this tournament, and they branched out and started their own, which is kind of what happened. There are just so many other tournaments now. Huebner said the book is available on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. Another publication, a book called Service Above Self, is now available, chronicling the 41-year history of the Slatington Rotary Basketball Tournament. The Slatington History Preservation Committee and Rotary Club of Slatington announced the joint venture, which is the fifth in a series on Slatington sports history, following the successful publications Clad in Iron, 2018, 10-0, Here We Go, 2019, Beasts of the East, 2021, and We've Got the Bite and Bark, 2023. This 38-page book chronicles the history of the Slatington Rotary Basketball Tournament, held annually at Northern Lehigh High School since 1982. Slatington Rotarians Michael O'Brien, Joe Bechtel, and the Reverend Barry Harbach are credited with establishing the event. O'Brien contacted former Northern Lehigh Athletic Director Glenn Rissmiller with the idea, who, in turn, invited Palmerton, Nazareth, and Parkland to join Northern Lehigh in the first tournament. Over the years, 13 schools have participated in the tournament: Northern Lehigh, Palmerton, Lehighton, Jim Thorpe, Nazareth, Catasauqua, Kutztown, Parkland, Panther Valley, Liberty, Tamaqua, Notre Dame Green Pond, and Bethlehem Christian, with no 14, Pleasant Valley, involved in this year's tournament, which begins Thursday night. Included in the book are game results from each of the previous 40 tournaments. There was no tournament in 2020 due to the pandemic. A history of Slatington High's participation in other holiday tournaments in the Lehigh Valley during the 1950s and 60s, various statistical records, and yearly all-tournament teams and most valuable players. Archives of local newspapers, the Morning Call, and the Lehighton Times News provided research material for the publication. The softcover book, published by Times News Publishing in Lehighton, is available by sending a check made payable to Slatington History Preservation Committee for $10 to 44 S. Walmart Street, Slatington, per 18,080. Individuals who live out of the area and would like the book shipped to them can do so with an added $5 cost. Books are also expected to be available for purchase at this week's tournament. Here's a look at some of the area tournaments in the next week.